Yeah, so happy to have you, Mike, and I have got an advertisement of this talk, and I'm thrilled, and let's see,
Let's see how thrilling it is to everybody. Well, so yeah, thanks a lot. Loving this meeting. Really enjoyed all the talks. Discussion's been great. Anyway, thanks very much for having me here. So this is a sort of high-level talk for the most part, although we'll see how far we get in different stuff, and maybe at the end I'll talk more about specific things that we're doing in the lab. But yeah, some overstated opinions about nature of intelligence, AI safety. Here's a little outline of what fundamental physics limits and computation. So I thought about that. That was one of your 5 questions to think about. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I don't really know how to define intelligence, so I start computation here instead. But I think then you get limits that aren't so useful. And I won't even say what they are. I'll cite some people, and then But essentially, they're so far from where we are now, and I think it's useful for AI safety in 2024. That's my feeling. But there's loads of circumstantial evidence from biology that there's simple architecture and simple rules are enough to produce human intelligence. So I'm gonna overstate things you've probably already heard about that and see if you agree with me that conventional thinking is correct. And then AI safety. So I'll talk a little bit about what I think one of the biggest safety issues might be for long-term AI safety, and we'll see what you think about that. And then whatever, throw brickbats or kudos or whatever in a little discussion. And then time permitting at the end, we can talk about what does good AI theory look like, and by good I just mean things that I think are just one subset of things that people might do. 2 things we're trying to do that are harder to do with neuroscience, I think. So AI offers, you can do better theory in a way because you have so much more information. You have control of the system. So a couple things we're trying to do there. Anyway, maybe we'll talk about it forward. The hour of time.
I mean, you could do good theory.
Sorry?
You could do good theory.
You could do good theory, but no one does. Yeah, I mean, I would agree that. I would agree. We're supposed to start a conversation, right? No, not no one. I mean, like a fraction of the most people's objectives with there's a land grab. Deep learning works. Let's apply it to all these different data sets.
Yeah.
There are obviously there's a growing community of people doing really cool theory, and there have been people doing. But it's, I think, surprisingly small fraction of what happens is, I would call theory. Anyway, fine. So yeah, interdisciplinary approach. My group does neuroscience, no longer experiment, just theory right now, and and artificial neural networks, and non-equilibrium stat mech. I'm going to talk in this more about neuroscience than physics.
It's more like a walnut.
Sorry?
Yeah, it does.
The walnut, yeah, no names, but yeah, that's supposed to be a human brain. All right. So physics can provide limits. Hard limits from neutron bombs, black holes, light speed, whatever. There's this article that came to mind to me, and I thought I'd put it to everybody else too. What are the physics limits to computation? There's this really interesting article in Scientific American that I enjoyed that put just absurd limits on how many flops you can get, how many floating point operations per second you can get based on extreme environments and extreme, the idea of a laptop made of a black hole. I'm not going to get into what they suggested, but you can guess those limits are far from what I think people are interested in for this sort of meeting, right? And then you might think, well, wait, it's a black hole. There might be issues with readout. They made a big deal about the fact, even back in 2007 in the article, to my surprise, they stated what is, I think, the correct resolution to this issue about Hawking radiation, that you can read it out. There's entanglement entropy. You don't really lose the information that goes in. So yeah, I guess it's not crazy to think of that making a black hole. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about that, but that's what came to mind to me for physics limits. So this may be true, but it's practical, as I said. Neuroscience offers an existence proof. Human intelligence obviously is the only real existence proof we've got. What we sort of mean by intelligence is some aspect of what people do and how we think or what we do. So where do we get these limits? I think most people know this. I'm just going to put it out there. Neurons in our heads. When I say in our head, I mean in cortex. Not talking about in an insect or in other parts of our nervous system. But if you're looking at our head, we got an input and an output, a dendrite and an axon. We only communicate with action potentials. It doesn't even matter for this talk, but it's a digital code, if you like, once you get past the periphery and you get into the brain, which ought to put some pretty serious limitations on what's possible. for computation. The phrenologists, people who looked at the bumps on your head to figure out what your personality was, whatever. Well, they were right about the fact that there's specialization and whatever. There's maps. You all know this, right? And so you can map. This is visual cortex in the back of your head, primary visual cortex from a monkey actually, and then the front is just a pattern, a light pattern on the retina. And you can see it maps on there, and that's how you can say.
Is this like this is neural activations in a pretty literal sense, like oxygen, or what are they?
It's some sort of a dye that would show up when there's metabolic. Actually, not even metabolic activity. I think you're right. I think it was just tracers they put in some pattern, and then just did histology. Yeah, this is old. This is data from actually '82. Not as old as I thought it was, but maybe I don't think that's very old. But that's anyway old standing experiments they would do. The point is that there are these maps. So how do you talk about how many brain areas there are associated with vision? You get separate maps, and so if you get a separate map here, here, and here, say, oh, they're separate areas, and then they're connected through. Oh, well, here they go. So here's a macaque brain. You flatten it out because it's all around. This is all the surface, the cortex, multiple layers in the cortex. You flatten this thing out. You can see the different areas. You can count the different areas that have separate visual maps of the full visual system, of the full visual fields. Okay, these are separate areas. They're connected inside like a switchboard. In a cartoon, but that's a pretty good cartoon. Here's the Van Essen sort of engineer's picture of the visual system for whatever for monkey. And then this is all I'm saying, that you got your different areas, they're connected, right? It's like a switchboard through the white matter. White matter, it's white because you've got the myelin. Yeah, thank you. I couldn't think of the name. But yeah, the myelin covered. It makes the wires transmit faster with their spikes. In any case. And yes, there's a lot of repeated structure there. I'm not going to get into the details. But the point is that there's a lot of obvious structure that's been seen. I think that's a Ramon y Cajal drawing from over 100 years ago, right? People noticed there's these structures. And you all know, yes, the fantasy for most neuroscientists, right? You're trying to see the repeated structure and then be able to, if you see this thing over and over again, you don't have to worry about all these details anymore. You say, oh yeah, I know what this is. It's got this functional form, it's just a transistor, and then you get a certain configuration of transistors shows up over and over again, and say, oh yeah, it's just an op amp. So like that's the hope, right? And it's not just the hope for neuroscience, it's a pretty good guess that something like this is going on, and that's how it's possible for us to have evolved so quickly, and I'll go through all this. So, why is it that we ought to be able to understand how intelligent, so my guess is that we're going to understand fairly rapidly. I guess I'm not going to put a year on it, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if it turns out we can figure out a lot of how intelligence works pretty rapidly, because it's going to involve a few simple rules and some simple architecture, right? The genome is really short, 1 gigabyte and that's uncompressed, and the genome this is for a person, right? And a lot of that coding stuff that's not your brain, and it's like you could get 256 genomes on one thumb, at Amazon for $26 now. Like that's just not that much data, uncompressed, right? On top of that, it's been 3.2 million years since Lucy, right? And how many until the modern era, right? And what is that? It's 20 million generations of random mutation and natural selection from a relatively small population of hominids, right? So how is it possible that you could go from that to where we are now, right? With just this, right? That's not backprop. It's not with the. It's just random mutations, right? It's not directed in any way, as far as we know. So it's just shocking to me. We don't know how smart Lucy was. You might push back and say, well, maybe Lucy would contend for a Fields Medal in the modern era. I doubt it. I think just looking at the size of the brain, even, right? And in fact, what do you have to do to grow a bigger brain? Well, all that repeated structure, right? Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. It's these numbers we can quibble about exactly when our most recent common ancestor was with different creatures, and we can also quibble about who's intelligent and who's not. But I can make an argument that each of these animals, pachyderms and gray parrots and cetaceans and octopuses, and of course chimps, have a lot of what we mean by intelligence. Maybe not as much as we've got, but gosh, we really diverged a long time ago from octopus. So convergent evolution, arriving at an intelligent by a good chunk of what we have for intelligence, not everything, That's really compelling to me. I mean, so it's happened over and over again through completely separate lines of evolution. So
Isn't it compelling that intelligence exists?
it's compelling well, I'm trying to make it, what is my argument? What is my goal, my claim? My claim is that there's just a few simple rules, and it's a simple set of architectural motifs that you can just stack up and make a deep net of these things with a little bit of recurrence maybe and whatever else, and that's going to get you.
Because it's happened a number of times,
Because,
short period of time.
yeah,
Okay.
like the most common, like octopuses are really smart. Like you can put them in a maze, they can figure it out, they can figure out how to open a jar and all these kinds of things, and they have a lot of, they're social and all this kind of stuff. So it's amazing that starting from a really primitive organism, it's come up multiple times. That's my favorite example, but just, I think, maybe I should show of hands. Does anybody surprised by anything I'm saying or disagree, or feels like, I don't buy it? I think
it's from, like in cells, for example, because we have the same cells as octopuses do, right? Like animal cells.
So I'll grant you that we don't know how intelligence works, and I'll make that point in a few slides to sort of temper my strong claim that it's going to be simple rules and intelligence is going to be cheap. It's not going to be that hard to figure out. But I think what matters is the circuit. I don't think what matters is, as I'll say in in a couple slides, we can talk a little more about that.
Mm-hmm.
There's two ways that cells matter, right? One is if you think, I'll even use some names, like, just to put a name on it, smart people who would disagree with me, or, Tony Bell would say, you have to, I mentioned this to somebody at dinner last night, last time I talked to him at least, he would claim that you have to know about the full lattice of water molecules inside of a neuron to understand what the function is inside the neuron and what the exact processing. I don't think that's true, but the thing is I can't prove it not true based on any data I'm aware of.
So you're discounting subcellular.
Sorry?
You're discounting subcellular processing, pointing to the higher levels.
I don't think I'm discounting it. I'm saying that so if you're a lumper or a splitter, like how many cells are there? That's another thing on a future. Like this discussion is going in exactly the direction I would expect. If Markram were here, Henry Markram, he would say, there's thousands of different cell types.
Yeah.
And if I were here, I'd say, there's 5, that are really functionally distinct, that's enough. And I might be wrong, he might be wrong, but neither of us have good evidence to back up our claim. So it's still an open question, I would say, and it's more a matter of fashion and taste right now in terms of and it's also a matter of what their prep looks like. If you spend your time studying differences in the milieu of the various molecules in one cell versus another, then what do you know? Those people tend to make a lot of differences between cells. Whereas if you're like me, you're recording extracellularly or you whole cell patch gland, but I don't have access to what cell type it is. Maybe I'll say, it doesn't matter. What matters is right. So I feel like what people's preps have been driving their opinions about what the coding scheme is, what matters, but.
So are you arguing that basically the neurons for all these different species are essentially functioning the same way on a cellular level?
So I guess what I'll argue in a couple slides is just the extreme plasticity of the human brain. If we're talking about human cortex or mammalian cortex, right? And so, 3 of these examples, right? The cells are pretty similar if we're looking in cortex. Pretty similar. There's a couple different flavors. You got inhibitory and excitatory cells. Very important distinction, right? That the excitatory ones cause downstream neurons to be more active. If they're active, the inhibitory ones tend to shut them down because of the sign of the current that goes into the cell postsynaptically, right? And there's a couple different kinds of inhibitory neurons. They have different computational roles, I would say. In fact, I even have models that say what one of those should be. And then the excitatory cells, there's a couple different types, but you got spiny stellates and you got pyramidal cells. There's I don't know, like I said, if you're a lumper or a splitter, but roughly, there's a few different kinds. But in terms of, and it's a good question with birds, it's a little trickier maybe, but not that much different. They still have spiking neurons that are, but if you look at insects or you look at aplesia or like worms and things like that, I think it's possible to understand how the human brain works before we figured out for a worm, because they have a lot of, or a fly. Flies have special neurons where individual neurons play a major role that would be, taken care of by many thousands of neurons in my brain. And these are multi-purpose neurons. What do I mean by that? I mean that there's so much plasticity in my brain, in all of our brains. If some insult were to happen to my brain or whatever, like I said, there's extreme plasticity. Well, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. But oh yeah, you and you? Yeah.
I guess I'm just trying to figure out like how much it seems to me a little bit like you're trying to argue for neurons as fairly simple computational elements that have sort of universal properties.
I would say universal is more important than simple.
Yeah.
So if you've got, whatever, 10 billion neurons, and they're not identified like they are in a fly, where there's specific roles assigned to specific neurons. If it's the circuit that wires up and there's experience and there can be some damage and whatever else, or lack of nutrition and all these different kinds of things, and it still functions at the end, the learning rules are really working for you, and neurons can take whatever role is needed. You can imagine. Well, anyway, I won't get an analogy to that. I'll just say that. I'll just put it out that way. I feel like what I'm seeing is that it's just a few rules, and it's a pretty robust architecture. This stacked set of layers, right? If you read, there's all these neuroscience experiments. You route the visual inputs, to the auditory system, to the auditory cortex, and vice versa. I forget which species they did this in first. There's a famous paper, if it was a bird or a frog. But you do this, and what do you know? The animal can still see, maybe not perfectly, like you can see some deficits in behavior. I don't know how clever they even checked the behavior in those days when they first did that experiment. But it's shocking how plastic the system is to radical changes. It's not like it's all hardwired to the outset, special cased. Every neuron's doing something. And that's kind of what we've seen with AI in recent times. We've gone from 30 years of Hinton telling everybody, hey, we should have these deep nets that and they have their special case networks that do much better. And then all of a sudden we hit a threshold with how much data you can put in these things and with how fast machines are, and crucially a few tricks that avoid getting you stuck in a cul-de-sac, getting stuck with your weights, so that now all of a sudden deep learning outperforms all those things. And I feel like nature did something similar, but on a grander scale. But it's not so much. It's not. I don't think it's gonna. Like it is. I think human intelligence is qualitatively stronger than anything that current networks can do, with GANs and transformers and deep nets and whatever else. But I think that getting there is not going to be qualitatively different than the kind of advances that we've seen so far, because it just seems like there's a pretty robust solution. You can get there through lots of paths. It doesn't take that many iterations to get there without someone directing along. Boy, a lot of skeptical faces. It's really interesting.
I guess I have one quibble.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
One quibble, which is that you say it's 1 GB uncompressed, but you can think of this as a decompressor or compiler, and
Sure. And
it's
so
not clear with it.
that's a great question, and there are two. And so this is a discussion that you and I were having last night or 2 nights ago. Anyway, about like where are the reservoirs that we could have beside the genome for information. And one is sure, for humans, right? We're in the womb for a long time. So even aside from our own cells, there's even the environment of the mother, right? And on top of that, it's true. You could imagine all kinds of information being passed, the batons being passed between cells from mother to child. And there certainly are examples of traits people pick up from, I forget what you call that. There's a buzzword for that.
Epigenetic?
Maybe it is a genetic trait where depending on the mother's eating habits or environment when she's pregnant, the kid grows up and has certain traits that aren't clear. It's not. No one's been able to find a way to associate that with genetics. It seems like it's a change. It's a chemical change that happens based on the environment in the womb that affects the right. And so I could totally sure. But how many bits is information going to get from that? I mean, it's a good question. I mean, the genome is especially designed to preserve information over long periods of time, and it's freaking short, and it encodes for everything. It encodes for the shape of my feet, and I'll stop there. But I mean, there's a lot more in my body than just my brain, right? And it's true. There's I'm sure it's very efficient in some ways.
How many because I've heard these numbers that our genome's 99.9% the same as chimpanzee's genome, right?
Yeah, right.
So how big
Or
is the
fern,
difference?
there's even these awful,
Yeah, what's the actual difference between us and chimpanzee? Like how many base pairs is it actually?
So I don't have that top of my head, and we can look it up.
That many, right?
It's not big, right? And so what you might say is, okay, that just proves to me there must be, so like what's in our reservoir for information? You mentioned cells, but you know,
Yeah.
chemistry itself, right? Just the fact that you've got this code in your genome,
Right.
and somehow there are these molecules that, you know, come down and unpack it and then turn it into proteins and
Yeah.
whatever else, right? And obviously there's some information in that, and I would love to put a bound on it, a upper or lower bound. I'd be thrilled to have some handle on that. It's a real, but I don't think, I feel like it's very contrived for me to say, oh yeah, what's going on is, you know, I'm going to use the letter A to represent the Encyclopedia Britannica. Back in the old days, that was these set of books you'd read that have information. Now it's the web, right? But you know, you could imagine a lookup table that's that absurd, where the language encodes all the information, and you just have a couple symbols that say, you know, and it's true, there are high-level Hox genes and things like this, genes that are, you know, that tell you, okay, I want you to put a finger here, and then there's a plan for making a finger, and that involves this cascade of other genes. But I think it's more contrived to say that chemistry, as it happens to be in our universe before people, although we can talk about anthropic stuff, or you know, we can get into this sort of string theorist argument about why we're here. Okay, fine. But barring any extraordinary, I don't know, coincidence or contrivance, it's hard for me to believe that chemistry, as it is, and passing signals, chemical signals from mother to child, are enough to like multiply many times the information from the genome. I mean, I could go for an order of magnitude or two, but I can't go for.
But it has to be, because there's so many
At
more
some
than
level.
1,000 bits different between us and a chimpanzee.
But also we know that short programs can have very complicated behaviors. If you think of the DNA sequence as a program,
That's true.
Information content, it can have very complicated behavior just from a few bits.
It's true. I wonder though what if you want to. So suppose you have some goal in mind for your program, other than how complex it is, and everyone here probably has more intuition about that than I do. But you know, producing a person that has intelligence is a pretty special thing.
Well, you don't have to produce a person.
Right.
Like, there's lots of things
Well,
you
fair
can
enough.
produce.
Absolutely.
So like anything that does
Fair
is intelligent
enough.
works, right?
Fair
Right?
enough.
It just so happens
But
humans.
the fact that you could, like, you know, the structure in a bird brain is, I mean, there are analogs, and in fact, if you want to get funding and if you want to get your paper published, you know, people who work in birds know how to describe different parts of structures in ways that remind us of, you know,
But for instance, the
people.
information to encode a GPT-4 architecture is not that much. And then
Sorry?
The information to encode the GPT-4 architecture is not that much.
Well, but you need a ton of training data though, like
Right.
more than
But,
humans.
yeah, that's my other point. That a lot of the information might be in the environment instead of inside the human. Like,
So-
humans live in a complicated environment and you produce.
But I don't think that, so I think it's true that if what you want is a nervous system that's really good at parsing natural scenes, we benefit hugely by being exposed to natural scenes. Although there's some really interesting stuff about how you look at cats when they're first have eye opening, they already have a lot of the structures in V1. They've already got, and this is neuroscientists talk about this all the time. It's a major result, right? That there's already a lot of structure there. In fact, you lose that structure over time if you don't get exposed to normal visual stimulation. But that's level of V1 as opposed to like the 35th visual area that's on the top of the, you know, learning things like faces and learning things like, you know, how to parse a scene when you're driving and be able to recognize where the road is. That kind of stuff, I'm sure you're not born with. That's lots of visual experience, but lots is not that much data anywhere near compared to what we're doing.
It is kind of crazy though, like things like, because people do think there is this part of your brain that can like visualize, that can recognize faces, or that can.
Yeah, it's called. I'm sorry, I want to say LIP. It's
The fusiform gyrus?
yeah, phasiform. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, or like there's also a part of your brain that's like good at learning languages. It's kind of crazy that can be coded by
The
only.
phrenologists were right. Yeah.
That can only be coded by maybe like 1,000 bits different, like in the genome between us and chimpanzee or something.
Okay, sorry.
But
I need, as you're talking, I need you to fill in. You're doing this calculus, genomic calculus, that's mashed with information theory. And what you're missing when you're talking about biological organisms is development. You can't just be purely evolutionary counting for the genes.
Well,
Right,
and so that's,
this
and that's the
expresses
argument.
this. I know, and it just needed to be part of this picture.
Yeah, but so as I said,
And
I'm willing to accept that there's, well, you know, I don't know the answer, but you know, I'm making a strong argument. It's an overstated opinion, as I said.
I'm helping you.
Although I am being sincere, I really do think that it's going to turn out that a few rules are going to take us a long way, and some repeated structure with it once we get it figured out. But sure, development does provide information, but you know, it's a good question. Like, we can even talk about experiments. I don't know if they're ethical to people, but like, we can talk about experiments where we have an artificial womb, or we have an artificial, or for that matter, artificial cells if we had to, you know, or whatever. I don't believe that it's going to turn out that you don't get normal development unless you have all kinds of hidden messages. Beyond, like, if you have some amniotic fluid, I mean, how much information is going to be in the chemical soup in there? Not that much. Compared to, and you might say, well, maybe if it's timed just right and it's coming in these signals. Yeah, I mean, we could put limits on it. We could calculate how much of a crazy waveform could I have over time for each of these different chemicals that might be important. I'm really skeptical that it's going to give you, you know, orders of magnitude more structure that you don't just get from the genome and from chemistry. And chemistry has whatever shape it's got. Chemistry does. It's a very modest version of the letter A represents this tome of information, but it's nowhere near as much as it would require. Like, I don't think the way evolution has worked is by designing an elaborate lookup table.
I agree.
I think that there's extremely efficient. Just because of these arguments, I just don't believe it. You know, I mean, here, let me give you a few more of these. You know, lots of repeated structure. I already said that. Cortex seems to be modular. You know, I've talked about that. Extreme plasticity. So, you know, here's my favorite example of. Favorite meaning. It's a shame that people suffer from epilepsy, but it's an interesting fact that if a child suffers from severe epilepsy, sometimes it's inoperable. Well, it is operable. It's not. It doesn't. It's drug resistant, and in the most severe cases, this is an example where you take out half of the brain. And this is a human. Like, this is not an insect, right? This is a human. You take out half, and this is saline here, right? And I'm not going to show you a movie of this kid walking and talking and playing on the playground, but go on YouTube and you can find these videos. This is from Cleveland Clinic. There's other places where they treat children this way, and you know, they have fundraising videos where you can see kids who can live lives, you know, and who are and first you see them on the playground at age 12, and you won't notice unless you're already tuned in to look for that there's something up, right? I mean, you will notice probably if you talk to them, literally walk over, and some of them they have different deficits, but they're mild compared to what you'd expect if you take out half of the cortex after all that womb experience, right? You know, this is after they're out of the womb and they're having epilepsy as a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, and they can develop more or less normally, where this side of the head takes over. You know, Wernicke's area is gone, and you know whatever. This side of your visual field and this side of your body, all the motor control, all that stuff's gone. Hey, we'll just rewire it, and it isn't like doctors have to force the rewiring. It just happens on its own, right? So that's another example of why I'm really skeptical there's going to be that many rules. There's going to be a few very well-designed rules, and there's going to be really robust architectural elements, and you stack them up. And if you want a dog, you have this much cortex. You want to have a person, well, you have a few, you know, and you have these random events occurring during evolution, and you know, geez, Lucy's only, you know, a few million iterations ago. Well, what do? You just have a gene or a virus or something that gets into your gene and winds up making your cortex has a giant new extra section that doesn't look any different than the part you already had, just more of it, and then you have some more wiring and you get a taller network as a result. And right. Anyway, I think this is probably most neuroscientists' view, I would guess. I think this is the way people were talking when I started doing experiments, I don't know, a couple decades ago. Yeah.
If just stacking these layers of, brain,
Sure.
just makes you go from the intelligence of a dog to the intelligence of a human, like why don't we just evolve to have brains they have
Because
the size of
we
baseball?
already have to live, a whale has to go 2 years in the womb, we have to go almost a year, and then we're born way before we're able to walk or do anything. Why? Because of the size of our head. When a baby comes out, it's half head, half the rest of the body. And so you are limited by, I think that there are biological limits to how big you're going to produce a brain. It's because you might, and it's also extremely metabolically expensive, right? And we were having a discussion earlier about, which do you want? More gut or more brain? You don't get both. And if you have a bigger gut, you can eat whatever you find. But if you have a bigger brain, you can remember where the good food is, and what happened last season. And you're better at discriminating. Oh, this is right. I can digest this. I can't digest that. So there's a metabolic trade-off. But yeah.
Sorry, follow on. Whales have really big brains.
Yeah, huge.
And when it's all that, the stacking of these neural layers basically make them super geniuses? Or?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I can't say that they're not super geniuses, although I'm of the mind that I don't think that whales are going to turn out to be smarter than we are at the things that we're smart at, but I could be wrong.
But don't
because
they,
you can't ask them.
I mean, don't they have like twice as many? I mean, orcas have like twice as many neurons as we do, right?
But no more layers.
The thing is, most of the brain is there for controlling the body and sensing the body.
Yeah.
And so if you get and there's allometric scaling, and we can and there's really nice. I don't have any of this in this talk, but you can look at how big of it, and of course remember the surface of the cortex, and they're mammals like us, so they got this really wrinkly surface compared to, in rats, which I used to work with, they have smooth surface for the most part. There's like one sulcus down here, one groove, right? Why is that? It's because the surface area has to grow faster than r squared, where r is your height, right? I'm talking, not even talk some physics, okay? So, anyway, and so it gets wrinklier and wrinklier because the brain volume is not growing, let's see if I get my numbers right. Anyway, we can work out the numbers, but the point is that it doesn't work out as the surface area of a growing sphere. It's a little faster than that. So what you wind up with is lots of grooves. And you look at it's a science fiction brain. You look at a disembodied whale brain, and it's just the number of sulci. Anyway, the number of grooves is huge. But most of that is because they have a bigger body and they have to innervate more. And because you innervate your insides as well as mostly on your surface, but a lot on the inside too. That's part of why it grows faster than r squared. So a lot of why you get a big whale brain is not that they have a deeper net necessarily. It's that they need to have bigger regions for each of the maps. And I'm talking. This is cartoonish.
Around this whale stuff, there's actually a theory that some of the reasons you mentioned the brains are big. There's a lot of tissue to control.
Absolutely.
But there's also an argument that's actually kind of taken seriously that you need more neurons in the brain so it stays at a reasonable temperature.
Oh, you mean the brain? So the brain stays at the right temperature.
Yeah, the little heaters in there. We just need more active biological matter to keep it at
That's
temperature that
interesting.
the chemistry will work.
I think that's an expensive way to do it. I would think.
I don't agree with it. I'm just telling you where the field is.
Well, in any case, and I'm a huge fan of whales, and it wouldn't shock me if there's much smarter than I am. It's just that but I just think my sort of parsimonious view of it is it's mostly due to and actually we can check that. I mean, it must be known, right? Whales, not as much work is done on whale brains as rat brains or cock brains. Not even close, and for good reason, right? For multiple good reasons. But one question I would have is there's an easy thing you could ask, which is how much of this is are there more visual areas and certainly there be more auditory areas? I would guess. Yeah. Just given that that's such a
visual and auditory areas are believed to be intertwined.
Oh yeah, I can believe it.
3D process.
Although, and we can talk about rat recordings and stuff like that, and there's all kinds of one sort of trend in neuroscience over the last few decades is how much phrenologists are right in the sense, there's this specialization in different parts of the cortex, but it's also true that there's a lot of multisensory areas and even the lowest level sensory areas. One of the results, the only experimental result from my group, it was just my own data, my group's data and our analysis alone, was about how what you're doing right now, just focus on my voice and turning their voices out. Okay, thankfully other people are not talking. Thanks very much. But there aren't that many distracting sounds. But if there were, just for a cocktail party, you could focus on my voice, tune their voices out. You train rats to do that. You record from the prefrontal cortex, record from the auditory cortex. And prefrontal cortex, yeah, that's way at the top of one of these, top of this net, right? This is you know, like executive control sort of area, all that kind of stuff. You would expect it to care about what tasks we're performing, what the rules are, and stuff like that. But we found that in the primary auditory cortex, you know, one of the first places, there's like 3 places roughly in the auditory cortex that receive direct inputs from the auditory system as it first gets to the cortex before all this process. And we found that that area, even though it's a low-level processing area for sound, is already involved in what task you're performing. You know, it's already changing what it does based on what the rat's trying to do with the sound. Is it trying to localize the sound? Is it trying to listen to pitch, trying to discriminate pitch? And so that sort of fits the sort of general trend in neuroscience, I'd say, where, yeah, first everyone realized, well, there's cells in the brain. 100 years ago, oh, okay, now the cells, there's different specialization. And then it was, oh, there's also, it's not that simple. There is obviously a circuit-wide or brain-wide change in what's going on based on what task you're performing. Anyway, but here, if I bludgeoned you with this, I don't know, people are, what did it say? I think it just repeated what we've already said. Yeah, so I think the big difference between you know, different mammals anyway, of different, you know, like a human versus a dog, I think the biggest difference is you just get more cortex sheet that happened however many millions of years ago, and then you stack up a higher hierarchy for the people, and on top of that, obviously there's some tweaking that happened over, you know, whatever. It wasn't just a matter of stacking it up, but it's shocking based on what I was describing earlier about these experiments where you reroute input into some animal and see what happens during development, or for a child who's got epilepsy, remove half the cortex. It's shocking how successful this thing works. But the plasticity tells me that it can't be that complicated. I mean, there's just a few rules. There's some robust architecture, and it's not true for a fly. You take one cell out of, I know what, you know, if you take one lobular plate neuron out, wide field motion, the fly can't fly anymore, right? Or you take one, there are single neurons you can take out of insects where entire behaviors are gone and they can't recover. It isn't like there's plasticity. In fact, individual neurons have all kinds of complicated, like I showed you that neuron in the beginning, there's an input and there's an output for any given neuron pretty much in your cortex. That's not really true in an insect brain. They can have, the dendrites can talk to each other from the same, like there can be multiple places inside and outside where a neuron's communicating.
Doesn't argue for a shift, you know, kind of over evolutionary time from brain components that only let you build a lookup table to brain components that actually learn or adapt in a qualitatively different way?
I think it's possible that it's going to be qualitatively different. I think it's great people study, Rob DeReuter doing his working with Bill and everything. I mean, that got me into neuroscience, and I love that stuff, and I think it's really valuable, especially because you know what the nervous system is trying to do in the visual system of fly, but you know some of what it's trying to do. Yeah. Anyway, so here are some of the things people are already bringing up, but I'll bring them up again. Yeah. Other info reservoirs, yeah. So okay, it's true. The womb, you know, cells, the readout from chemistry, sure. I mean, that can add a lot of extra information in principle, but I'm arguing that that's not the big story. I think it really is the simplicity of the rules is the big story. Actual learning rules, yeah. So you know, we know what's going on in a deep net or whatever, or it's backprop, whatever it is. If you look inside, a mammalian cortex, you find that there's a zoo of rules. STDP stands for spike time independent plasticity. These are the Hebbian. What is Hebbian? Hebbian means there's a causal relationship between the presynaptic cell's activity and whether the connection between that and the postsynaptic cell fires. So if the presynaptic cell causes the postsynaptic cell to fire, is how Hebb initially phrased that. Back when, I'm not even sure if they knew about action potential. That was the 50s. So I guess they knew about action potential, but it was very early. Anyway, he intuited that would make a strengthening in the connection. It turns out that basic idea is correct, but it's complicated. Different cells have different rules, different kinds of causal rules. Anyway, all right. Nonlinearities in dendrite, yeah. So one thing. So what did it have to happen for me to put things on this list? Pretty much, it's that I know at least one smart neuroscientist who spends his or her entire career focused on this particular thing, even though nobody else uses it in their models. All right. So like that's how much we don't understand how the brain works. There are people who, like Bart Linnell, who's very good scientist, spends a lot of time thinking about power of nonlinearities, how nonlinear is, how much processing can one cell do, and how many, and most people don't worry about that. They use linear rectifier, or they got a little mild nonlinearity.
Wait, so how are these three things examples that we don't know how the brain works?
We don't understand what these, I mean, we're all arguing about this right now. I mean, it's just not known.
We don't know the contribution.
Actual learning rules, I'm just saying that there's, even what we know, there's this huge welter of, and we don't have any idea. Like, we haven't looked at all 10 billion neurons in a human brain to see what the learning rules. If you look in a rat and do careful experiments where you measure, it's hard to do these experiments, right? Where you measure how the strengthening or weakening of a synaptic connection is based on the pre and postsynaptic activity. It turns out there's a zoo of things you see and the few cells are able to record from.
And even when we do know, we don't know how they contribute to kind of population level computation.
But I'm just, even at this simple level, we don't even know, as opposed to, oh, I've got a network, I've got an artificial neural network, it's using backprop, or I've got a GAN, and here's the rule, or I've got a transformer, and here, like, where we know everything about it. It's very different in neuroscience.
So you got this diversity of things, and you're saying because it's so diverse, we don't know how the brain works. But maybe taken all together, we do.
Because it just,
I'm
because
trying to understand
it
the
averages
argument
out.
you're making. Yeah, well, not averages
Well,
out. It's all very special.
It could also be an Eve Martyr sort of a prep, you know, like looking at the somatic gastric ganglion of a crayfish, right, where you say, oh, no matter what I do to the system, however I perturb it, it winds up doing the same thing, which is grinding up the food in the gullet, not the gullet, in the, whatever you call it, the intestine or whatever it is. The tummy of the crayfish. Yeah, I'm not really a biologist for this, but if you, yeah, it's true. But you know, that's an example of homeostasis, and I'm a huge believer in homeostasis in the brain. I think a lot of what's going on in the brain is fail-safes to get it to do the right thing, which is this particular thing, this particular rule it wants it to follow, whatever it is, that's robust, right? Anyway, so now there you have it. Shunting inhibition. Yeah, so there's multiple ways that cells can inhibit other cells. They can inject negative current inside, but it's also like where on the dendrite, is it close to the cell body or just far away? And based on where you put that where you lower that impedance through the membrane, it'll affect what the current coming, you know, the dynamics, anyway. And people don't model that unless that's your hobby horse, right? A special role of gap junctions. Neurons don't just talk to each other through synaptic connections, they also are directly electrically connected in special cases, like fast-breaking interneurons in the cortex. And that's not modeled unless that's your hobby horse. Are oscillations important? Lots of people worry about oscillations, but no one has proven to me that they're necessary for understanding how the brain works. Could be an epiphenomenon. By oscillations, I just mean if you just record with an electrode on any of our brains, you'll see, yeah, for gamma level, and there's names for it. There's theta, there's gamma. People have postulated what they're important for, but no one has demonstrated to me that they understand what they're for. Is there a clock in our brain or not? We don't even know that. Christoph Koch was the first person, and one of his students, I should remember who that was, who first posed that question to mind, at least that I was aware of. You know, continuous time or clock, we don't even know, right? Computational role for glia. There are, in the last couple of years, there's been there's a growing literature on the importance of the support cells in the brain that eat up the waste products of cells and then repair them. Like when you have scar damage in your brain, it's glia that's there repairing and protecting and doing all that. And you have a lot, I mean, it depends on who you ask. If you read classic tests, it's like 100 times as many glia or something, and then there are others that say it's 1-to-1 glia to neurons. It's hard to count.
Also
and you've got
implicated in keeping whale brains warm, according to this one.
Sorry?
Also implicated in keeping whale brains warm, according to this one.
Oh, is the
previous
glia?
one. Yeah, no,
Sure.
okay. Right.
Well, it provides electrical insulation. Maybe it provides thermal insulation. But people will argue, and I put heme over here. Like people also will argue about whether brain blood flow can be involved in computation in some way that's significant enough that if you don't include it, you don't understand what's going on. And there's not, like, the reason it's on this list is I don't actually think that that's true, but I can't prove it wrong based on the data I'm aware of. Affected, yeah, we already talked about that. If you're a lumper or a splitter, how many cell types are there? Effective effects, there are scientists I know, one in particular, I should remember his name, I haven't talked to him in a couple decades, who worries about or thinks about models, in his models, how one neuron changes its behavior based on the electrical field near that cell, because this cell over here is firing. So these things are not, they don't have a gap junction, they're not synaptically connected, but in principle, sure. I mean, it's a fact of life that if there's electrical activity over here in a brain, it's not like you got perfect insulation. This one's going to be experiencing a different electric field. So is that important? Most people, no one models that unless that's your thing, right? Anyway, Tony Bell, you already mentioned that about why, my gosh, Penrose, if he were here, right? And I have enormous respect for Penrose. He's a hero of mine because of the physics and the math and his black hole work and the beautiful tiling stuff. I love that stuff. And in fact, we do have results in tiling too.
His brain stuff.
But his brain stuff is it's nonsense. It has to be. He's way smarter than I am.
Finally, good.
Well, yeah, I'm finally saying what I think. This is my goal is to. Tell me if you think you disagree, but
it's nonsense. But I also think he's maybe the only person who's brave enough to actually put forward a proposal. If you think your brain is non-computational, you need some mechanism for it.
So I totally agree that I can mention other people. I used to go to meetings, and there were people who would always throw the gauntlet down. Kind of like I'm sort of doing that now, except that.
Except you're right.
So well, I don't know if I'm right or not, but I'm reasonable. But there are I'm reasonable. There are people who would go to meetings and say things that were unreasonable, and the rest of us would stand up and say, "Oh yeah, you think you're so smart? I'm going to spend the next 5 years proving you wrong," right? And people would go out and they would direct the field. Christoph Koch is a great example of somebody who directs the field comes up with a great question and comes up with an answer. And in fact, I've spent some of my years coming up with a different answer than he came up with. I actually liked his answer fine. I just thought there was nothing that was more significant. Anyway, for a different story I won't tell, but the point is that those people are really important in science. And I've appreciated them more and more with time. You need people who will state a clear, bold claim and propose mechanism and make testable predictions. That's the best, right? It's a lot easier to see what everyone else believes, and then no one bothers to check, and then it's confirmation bias and whatever, anything. So I'm all for it. But Penrose, I think, is wrong that we need to know about quantum gravity in the form of microtubules inside our, I don't believe it. I think it's going to turn out for the same reason I don't need to know about I can understand how the engine of my car works without quantum gravity, and I think it's going to be the same way with our brains. It's not going to be that crazy. Yeah.
Sir, what's the statement exactly? How
The
does quantum
statement,
gravity
here's his statement. So
apply to
he wrote a book called The Emperor's New Mind. The first half of the book is about, the first half is about math, and he just talks about Gödel's theorem, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful introduction to me, anyway, as a young physicist reading that. I said, wow, now I understand what was significant about that, and I understand qualitatively how it works. And then he goes, and the second half is about physics introduction to people who don't know physics, and that wasn't so useful because I already know physics. But then at the end he says, okay, well, if brains are able to solve these problems that we know from Gödel, if there's no self-consistent logical system with a finite number of axioms, they go, well, it must be they're using something beyond Boolean algebra, and it can't just be regular, it has to be quantum gravity. And so he comes up with it. He's a smart dude, so he's able to come up with an argument to do what he wants to do. What does he want to do? He wants to pretend he's solving consciousness, because that's cool, and he wants to use quantum gravity because that's the stuff he knows, and he's the king of it. And it's also fun math, and it gives him an agenda. He can actually take quantum gravity stuff and apply it to this problem he wants to solve. But I view it as marrying two things that we don't understand very well that I think are not.
So I think he doesn't want to use dynamical systems and chaos. Also.
Sorry?
He doesn't want to use chaos.
Doesn't want to use chaos. Well,
fortunately, that means I only had to read 2/3 of the book, and then I could put it. I read that.
Yeah, the first half of the book was great.
Yeah.
I think maybe now we have a proposed resolution, because he's saying, ooh, Boolean circuits won't do it, we need quantum. But we have the stuff now that neural nets, because they're in this real value vector space, have some.
But he uses a quantum gravity. It's just.
Yeah. I'm not. That's a good idea. My feeling is much more pedestrian than that, which is that his argument for why we need to know quantum gravity is absurd, right? It's not like what humans are doing when they have an opinion about whether if somebody says I am lying, I say that's not true. It's not that they just dealt with Gödel's theorem. They just sort of fudged it, and they didn't really. It's not a deep thing that when we have to deal with logical problems, unless you're a mathematician solving that problem and trying to come up with or do what Gödel did or do what mathematicians do with those ideas, you don't need to deal with Gödel's theorem for most things that the brain evolved to deal with. So the idea that we have to tap into quantum gravity to somehow solve it in some other way is silly. I think you can solve it just by being a little fuzzy-minded and not worrying about, or just sort of punting on the cases where you don't have a good self-consistent answer.
Or just viewing the mind as a dynamical system that's not, just.
Penrose said.
Yeah.
But it's not a dynamical system that will, like Penrose would say, but no dynamical system using these sort of laws of physics that don't go down to this level are not going to have the property that they can deal with this good out. You see, but I don't care if it can deal with that or not. You don't need to deal with that to explain human thought or the way people.
I guess the dealing with the inconsistencies of self-referential logic. I mean, I think it's a rare physical system that actually runs into that as a problem.
That's what I'm saying. That's my claim.
Yeah.
So
biology doesn't care.
I'll point out that we're at 50 minutes. So I'd love to get closer to your punchline.
Yeah. Well, let me do this. You've been.
I mean, we also have like a pretty relaxed schedule this afternoon.
I know, but I don't want you guys to be so relaxed that you run to the table. So let's and we all were just walking around. I mean, I had a really stimulating afternoon, and I think we all did. So I appreciate you all coming to the talk and staying awake after spending our time with the zebras. So real quick, let me do this. All right. So we already talked about that. Okay, fine. All right. So how about AI safety? Let me just make one statement about AI safety, and I'll spare you the things that we don't have time for that we're going to do if there's time. All right. So what's the big danger? Yeah, it's true. It'll disrupt the economy and people lose jobs. But what's the existential? Because we're not going to deal with that with a technological fix. We're going to deal with the economy with a sociological fix, or not deal with it. But we're going to deal with it not by putting in fail-safes into AI, right? But what do we need fail-safes for? Well, my first thought is the usual. We were just at the zoo, right? It doesn't matter how powerful you are physically. If you're smarter, you run the zoo, and the animals who are not as smart wind up being in the zoo. That's a little poignant, but that's kind of the way the world works. And so the natural worry that we all have, and it's hopeful, right? This is my AI safety shirt with the Terminator, but he's hopeful. Once machines are smarter than we are, if in fact I'm right, or lots of other people are right, that we're heading in that direction, it's possible that it could happen. It's unstable, right? Self-preservation. All you need is one machine to say, "Wow, hold on, they can turn me off," or whatever. And so that's a problem, right? And I would characterize this as with a bigger problem of goal-directed behavior, the emergence of this, even if you haven't put it in by hand. I think that's really interesting to study anyway, intellectually, and I'd like to go in that direction in our group. We've thought about it a little. I don't have any results to tell you about right now, but that's the word, right? So we should study this. I think it's important. Now this is unsurprising. Everyone, this is not a new movie, right? It's not whatever. But there's another concern, right? So we look at Fermi paradox, right? Looking at outer space, we don't see advanced civilizations up there. And there's a bunch of reasons people have proposed, why is that? Well, maybe life doesn't start everywhere like it did here, or maybe intelligent life I don't believe either of those things. I think it's going to turn out that life's going to start other places. I think it's also going to turn out intelligent life.
Can I add one more point?
Yes.
It might just be that life is too strange for us to understand. Life
is too what?
It's too strange. We just don't recognize it. It's all around.
Oh, we don't recognize it. Fair enough. I would put more stock in hiding than can't recognize it, but I could totally believe you that's possible. There could be natural phenomena we see out there that really are just manifestations of advanced technology. Oh, look at that quasar.
They're just not measuring the right stuff. They're just in some totally different.
It's totally possible. For the same reason it's tough to talk to the whales. Yeah, maybe it's even harder to recognize intelligence when you see it outer space. Those are all possibilities, but I'm going to take it at face value for this talk and say, let's just, self-destruction with A-bombs and whatever, and people are, more technology advances, you get more and more power in smaller places, and then all you need is one wing nut, out of the however many billion around the Earth right now. And then, of course, the last possibility that they develop technology that wipes them out because technology itself becomes smart and for the thing we're worrying about, right?
Well, it doesn't even have to be self-destruction. There have been multiple mass extinctions on this very planet that were not, well, as far as we know.
You mean from like a meteor striking the Earth?
Well, I don't know. I guess my thought has always been it's a time thing, right? Like how long can a civilization sustain versus GR?
I should have included that. The thing is that I'm skeptical that, and for the sake of this talk, I'm just going to say if we care about AI and safety, let's just pretend that this is one of the things we have to worry about. Okay, so and how do we interpret the Fermi paradox if we're just gonna, but that's a great, I mean, you're right, that's a serious concern. That could wipe us out and everybody else, if you wait long enough in a universe with meteors flying around and other natural causes for
Although
problems.
perhaps if you're intelligent enough, you can go to other planets and then your
Yeah,
species
right.
isn't entirely wiped out.
Intelligent and
Yeah, I guess.
industrious.
But even just thinking about how hard, we don't have to get into it. But I feel like even just thinking about how hard it would be for us to get to Mars and survive, it's like Mars is a lot worse than Earth, even the worst
Yeah, I
scenario
agree.
of Earth. Yeah.
I agree.
So I don't know. I feel like it's a really hard problem, even
Yeah.
if you are intelligent.
Yeah, it is.
So that's a good point, and I should have had it on the list. Human population, but here's the thing: human population isn't growing so fast these days on the Earth, even though we haven't been wiped out by nuclear, Armageddon or by AI yet. In fact, first world, we're not in replacement anymore anywhere in the first world, and that's new. I mean, when my daughter was born, I looked all these statistics out. We were still growing as a nation, and it's not true anymore. And you look around the world, here's below replacement, above replacement, and what's the cause of this? Is this because of some killer virus or is it a meteor? Is it because of nuclear war? Is it because of AI attack? Well, it kind of is AI a little bit. It's because of entertainment, and it's because people realize they don't want to raise a family, and that's a lot of it. Also, education of women, which is really, I'm pro education. That is the fastest.
I'm glad to hear.
That is the fastest.
I'm so glad.
I love education of women. I think it's great. But one of the spin-offs of that is that population doesn't continue to grow like crazy where it used to, and I think that's mostly a good thing. But in the context of what in the long run is going to wind up being, it could be that what's going on is that far from the Malthusian over when I was an undergrad, I think, or before, the big worry was Malthusian. The population grows and grows, and then you run out of resources, and everybody's miserable, right? You grow until you're miserable, and I'm glad that we haven't. Well, I mean, obviously that still is an issue in many parts of the third world, but it looks like strangely, it seems like before we get to hard limits there, it's turning around, and very recently it's been happening, and I feel like it is coinciding in some way with AI. Although
it's actually a big problem. Unlike the fact that the population is skewing older is actually a big problem in places like South Korea and Japan and stuff. It's an economic problem because you need to have so many resources.
There's no workers.
There's no workers. You need to give a lot
Sure.
of resources to take care of old people.
Sure.
We're going to automate.
And so, choose your poison. I mean, you want overpopulation or underpopulation, but it coincides with this. No bombs or robot armies needed. We don't need this, right? What's happening is this, and it's just sort of farcical because obviously this is not somebody in a third world country who's deciding that. But it is true that I think a lot of what's going on is as the human race has moved forward. It's not, what's happened is, before I get there, let me say one more thing, which is you might say, well, wait a minute, okay, fine, but then what about alien AI? So maybe if what happens is alien AI is providing, services and entertainment and other forms of entertainment, technological progress happens, and then those aliens sort of shrink in their population and aren't doing things anymore or disappear, why doesn't the AI show up? Well, of course, the problem there is that, the AI is going to be susceptible to the same problem we've got, right? So that's why the most surprising thing I'm telling you in this story is that I'm saying that one thing we should think about, not just is the emergence of, because I'm concerned about our progeny as well as us. I'd like it to be the case that AI and humans have a long, happy, prosperous future, despite all the worries. We should also study the decay of goal-directed behavior. And actually, someone in my group is studying how, for different reasons, I didn't think about this stuff until like a week ago, having a conversation with, I cite my buddy this is my hedge fund buddy, Steve Strong from grad school. But he and I have conversations all the time about all kinds of stuff, and just one thing we talk about, and this is his proposed, is come on, Fermi paradox, the problem isn't, they didn't wipe themselves out with bombs, it's they're all watching TV, and they're not reproducing anymore. It's the population's crash. But then the next question is, well, what about AI? Well, that's another issue. Now, I know no one here is really that, you're not going to, 3 in the morning tonight, you're not going to be quaking, thinking, oh my gosh, what happens if my robot, in progeny, don't actually proliferate and take over the universe to the point where they're visible to other civilizations. But anyway, I think it's at least an intellectually interesting thing to think about, which is what causes, because depending on which algorithm we're talking about, we either impose a goal or we discover structure in something and then it might emerge, might learn a goal on its own. Well, the loss of goals too is something I think we should be studying. I'd like to understand it in both directions. In other words, change of what the thing is trying to do compared to what you initially started with in both directions. Anyway, yeah.
Why do you see entertainment as a threat to AI?
Because it'll short circuit. Like, why is it? So evolution has produced humans, and humans have these evolutionary drives, right, to reproduce, to find food, and avoid death, reproduce, right? But those can both be. I mean, avoiding death. I mean, I think we're doing a pretty good job of staying alive as long as we can for the most part in the first world. But in terms of reproduction, that's going down, right? And for good reasons. I mean, people have. I mean, I understand why. Like, I've only had one child myself. My wife and I are not at replacement. Right? My brother's carrying that load for us. But the thing is, it's. I can see why it's not a nefarious thing, but it taken to its extreme, right? These are exponential growth or decay, right? If the natural tendency is that these things get undermined, and you say, well, why would AI get undermined? For the same reason that people do,
So you think it's inherent? You think the greatest danger is inherent?
The greatest danger
is inherent.
It's inherent. It's inherent for intelligent, autonomous, self-directing. No matter what got them started, at some point, whatever it is that gives you some dopamine drop or a reward of whatever form that the robots get or the AI gets, that's short-circuitable, and people can get, like, I get a lot of satisfaction in making paintings without having to have multiple children,
But you only need,
what I mean? Like, there's ways of short-circuiting the...
You only need one species to not fall prey to this, like, ever.
And then some part of a species, right?
Yeah,
It's
one,
culture. It's
like,
very
the thing is,
fragile.
this needs, if this is your explanation, it needs to
You think my explanation for... You think that it's... I feel like... So I've tried to train rats, and you have too. You can back me up. And every rat will find a way around what I'm trying to teach it unless I design it so carefully. And so no matter how good a job evolution did to try to get... I'm anthropomorphizing evolution, but you get my point. No matter how good a job evolution has done in producing our psyche so that we are driven to reproduce and find food and avoid danger and live long enough and raise our children so that they will survive, it's short-circuitable.
Life as a whole has not run into this issue yet, right? Like life on Earth.
Yeah, but they're not intelligent.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't the
We're intelligent. I argued that monkeys apes and cetaceans and pachyderms, and so maybe with them there's a problem, but I think it's true. The birds and the bees yet, so far, other than great parrots, the birds and the bees, maybe, they're safe from this short circuit. Because there's competition with other organisms. I guess that's what you would say. It's a good question whether there's going to be competition from other AI if some AI gets short-circuited, or and maybe that's a bigger force.
Okay, but this is your point. Well, whether it's true or not, it's a separate discussion. I just want to be clear about what your point is. That's inherent.
Yeah, that it's a natural
Well, these other
phenomenon.
discussions we can have about whether it's going to happen or not. But I'm trying to be.
Well,
I want to be clear about what you're saying.
Yeah, but you're asking the right question, you're all asking great questions. But that's a very good question about, which way is greater instability? Like, is it the case that if you've got, and I've wondered about this a lot, like, is the right model for what we get with AI a bunch of interacting, working as a team kind of thing, or is it like individual autonomy? And I think that probably the individual autonomy is what we're going to get for the same reason that's what you get in biology. That it's just a more robust solution to have lots of individuals that are, and there's some level of competition, some level of cooperation, and different niches are fulfilled, and then if there's a change in the environment, or if there's competition, whatever. Anyway, and I think what I'm trying to say is all the stuff that can affect us can affect AI if in fact it's smart the way we're smart.
That's good.
So I'm wondering, I'm just trying to think of kind of maybe if you agree with the following, this is the same kind of issue you're pointing at, that you see the individual as an agent in kind of this distributed network, and they play certain functional roles to the stability of the whole thing and to kind of the health of the whole thing. And you're worried about the decay of agency and in the individual. And if that goes, they can no longer play kind of the healthful role that they play. What's the bad thing?
That's my point. It's like you're describing what, like a hedonistic spiral here?
Yeah, hedonistic spiral. And addiction to watching TV or whatever.
I mean, like,
it's my example of addiction. It's sort of a tame example. I
don't know. I mean, I guess my question is like, okay, so if the reason, just taking this all seriously, if the reason we're not seeing other intelligent life is because they're all fat and happy on their planets watching TV.
Well, but
is it so bad?
Well, but the question is, because the way you put it, if what happens is, so let's just project forward. Suppose we take these trends seriously about the population of the United States, and okay, for the first time in our history where we've rounded up for you guys, we're rounded, it's starting to be down. Okay, well, if it turns out that there's only one child per couple going forward, just because, on average, well, it's going to go small, and at some point, there's a societal issue. Like, well, in like in Italy and South Korea, there's, okay, well, I guess this town will be a ghost town now, we'll just consolidate and live in these other, but, at some point, it could be that we won't have sufficient functionality for the kind of modern, because the modern world is complicated, right? And everything, like, I don't know, there's the famous statement about, no one knows how to make a pencil, right? Because
sure.
You know what I mean? But writ large or whatever, our whole society consists of lots and lots of extreme examples of that, right? I mean, nobody even uses pencils anymore except me. But anyway, a car is a bigger example. It wouldn't. I could imagine getting to a point. Oh yeah, I know. I could imagine getting to a point where, it's not sustainable. You have to change the structure of society if you don't have that many people across. Especially if there's competition. I don't know. I mean, I'm obviously the devil's advocate throughout this whole talk.
No, I don't disagree with what you're projecting out, but I guess, is this not the same error as the Malthusian direction, where like could also happen, right?
The opposite sign.
We could level off to a stable population within the next.
But it's hard.
We haven't yet. But I mean.
So it's interesting because before the Industrial Revolution, right, and way before, like there were long periods of human history where things are pretty stable, population isn't growing, shrinking too much, and there's changes in. This isn't my field, but just based on some casual reading I've done, it's interesting that there were long periods where there wasn't a huge population of humans, but we didn't die out.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there were tigers out there and weather's bad some years, and even after we're a gregarian society, you could imagine going, through famines and things like that, and somehow people survive. So it could be that we will hit some, but I just feel like it's tough to engineer. It's easier to engineer exponentials that are growing or shrinking than it is to get the balance. Especially if the things that are causing the imbalance are changing rapidly. So if technological change is happening rapidly, which which of course you're going to say is going to stop as soon as we.
Well, no, I'm not arguing that. I just mean it's like I think there's a lot of complicated. I think the biggest one is. My personal. I believe that the biggest one is not just that we have TV now. I think it's that women no longer want to have, on average, I'm not saying everyone, but it's no longer common that you're going to get married at 20 and then have 5 kids. And also, it's much, much more likely that all of your children are going to survive, and you're going to put way more effort into raising those children than historically humans have, right? Like the focus that we put on children now in the first world is magnitudes greater than you may have if you had children or centuries ago.
But the average number is still not a replacement. So.
No, but I think there are. This is politics and not. So I'm arguing into something else here. Yeah, but I think there are. My perception for women of my age is that it's not that there is necessarily a lack of desire, but rather a lack of support and resources.
Sure.
And I think my hope and my belief is that those things will get better. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just being too optimistic.
So building on this, you can take a different explanation, which is that it's a Malthusian thing, but not with food, but with energy.
Could you say it again?
It's a Malthusian point of view, but not with food, as a resource, but energy as the resource, like energy per capita as the resource. And as a whole, human population as a whole has not increased in energy per capita over the last 40 years. Right? And this might be reversing now. We are starting to see signs of it reversing. And that might be sort of a different explanation for why we're limiting off.
That's interesting.
Is it rude of me to ask how this is related to AI safety?
Well,
no, I love the discussion.
well,
we can do that.
I mean,
but you have a connection, I think.
Well, my answer is just that what should we be studying? Like, what should and I say there's two things that I would like to study. One is the emergence of goal-directed behavior and otherwise not,
and whether that's stable.
And whether, and just what causes it. I think, and of course that's important for the Terminator scenario, right? But then I'm interested also in the emergence or the decay of goal-directed behavior.
Okay.
And there's a couple ways that can be manifest. One is the simplest thing, which is what one student in my group is actually looking at, in collaboration with another group, is looking at, with the large language models, do they forget commands if you give them too many commands? At what point do they not do what you ask them to do because they just can't keep it all straight? And that's sort of the simplest form of a decay of goal-directed behavior. You're giving them a task, but if the task is long and complicated, we don't have a good theory yet for large language models about what their limits are and everything else. It's more empirical.
People are studying small language models first.
Well, and that's what, and we're also doing some other stuff too I didn't talk about, but anyway, yeah.
I'm kind of interpreting the AI safety risk here as basically, AI hypnotizing us and itself into oblivion.
Sure. Short-circuiting.
Which is already, it's not hypnotizing itself, but it's already been happening for a while that, a lot of people have an addiction, basically.
Absolutely.
To AI products, TikTok, Instagram.
Absolutely.
Right. And it seems to me that it's so good at giving you that dopamine payoff that it's competing with, like, say.
Sure. There's economic reasons for that. People are selling this stuff and so people buy potato chips, they want to eat more of it.
This seems like a very real threat to me because, financial structures are currently in place that basically reward this type of development for AI, that harnessing
That's true, but as Jim kept emphasizing, I am saying that I'm imagining that it's an inherent problem, with intelligent. If you have intelligent, autonomous, whatever they are, beings, people, machines, whatever they are susceptible to being short-circuited.
Right.
Their goal, and of course that's true also of animals that aren't. But I feel like it's especially a problem with something that has so much control of its environment and so much control of how it spends its time. It isn't just following some rote program.
Yeah.
Just in the interest of time, I think.
Sure.
Can I suggest we can wrap up in 2 minutes and then we can carry discussion after.
Can I just say, like, broadly speaking, though? I'd encourage us all to think about, how can we take a path such that this is not the end.
I'd like to understand it better, even though I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
I'm like Francis Bacon the painter. I'm an optimist for no good reason.
Right.
Because when I go through the math, we had this discussion the other night. It's easy to get into doom and gloom about potential scenarios with AI, just based on the way nature, the examples we see there about what happens when you've got competing intelligences of different, and one's much more intelligent than the other, and the instability. But to the extent that it would be helpful, I would love to understand these processes better. Like to understand better the emergence and the decay of goal-directed behavior, because I feel like that's at least a good. Everyone, you all have better ideas than I do about why we don't see, tricked out aliens in outer space, but I think it's intellectually interesting, and I think it'd give us useful information, and maybe we'll learn something from it that would give us a handle to at least recognize when it's happening, or put some sort of brakes on the system some way. I don't know.
Can you quickly say what context you want to study this emergence or decay?
Well,
population dynamics, evolutionary theory, evolutionary development, but sociology. or just talking to the engineers about their AI? I mean, what context do you want to frame this so that you feel satisfied if you can answer it?
Well, I mean, first things first, right? Decay, I gave you the most trivial thing I could think, and it wasn't my idea, somebody else's idea, and I later realized it was a simple version of this, the forgetting instructions when you get too many instructions. In terms of emergence, though, it's a good question. Like, what do we like? I don't think. I mean, we can fool around with large language models till we're blue in the face. I don't think that they currently exist. Are going to all of a sudden there's this emergence. Maybe I'm wrong. But I don't think that we're there yet in terms of producing. So one thing I was going to say later parts of the talk. I mean, I got so many good questions. Fantastic. Is that like there's two kinds of theory I want to do with AI. One is where we do really careful stuff you can't do with neuroscience. Here's a quantitative. It makes predictions. I can design networks from first principles. That's one kind of theory. And the thing that smells like that for us is kernel regression, so these infinite width limits on deep nets, and then relating that to kernel regression.
That's a kind of singular learning problem.
Yeah. So that's one kind of thing we like to do. The other kind of thing I like to do is reduce the problem, another physics sort of approach, reduce it to the simplest possible model that exhibits the phenomena that I'm interested in. So I'd like to have the simplest model that exhibits the spontaneous emergence of goal-directed behavior, and I wish I had a good answer for you of exactly what I would like to do next week on that, and I don't have a good answer yet.
But I'm thinking,
But I'm thinking about learning rules.
I'm thinking about
Not
making a population of large
Yeah.
language models and they're interacting.
yeah.
I'm thinking about
That's a great question. I'm not imagining it that way. I'm imagining it.
Okay.
I'm imagining it not as a single algorithm, and I'm thinking of it in terms of rules, not in terms of genetic algorithms. But maybe I won't be able to come up with something like that. I mean, and I'm not the brains in my group. It's the students who I have not acknowledged. But and I don't know if they want to be acknowledged in this talk. So I'm probably doing them a favor to have not mentioned them. But look, here they are. Anyway, there you have it.
Thank you.